And- All right, I'm going to start it. Good luck, everyone.
Good morning and welcome. Oh, are we started?
I believe so, Laura.
Okay, thanks. I forgot how it looked. Good morning, everyone. Excuse me. I'm Laura Dresser. Welcome. This is the panel on innovating for equity, delivering anti-racist service delivery and policy advocacy with Krystal Folk-Nagua and Erika Chambers. We're thrilled you're here. We're going to make sure that folks get in the room before we get started. Know a lot of attendees are still coming into the room. So just another minute here, and then we will um, get this program going. Okay. Welcome, everyone. This is the first session, the start of the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference offered by the University of Wisconsin Sandra Rosenbaum School of Social Work. I'm Laura Dresser, and I'm happy you're here for the breakout presentation, Innovating for Equity, Delivering Anti-Racist Service Delivery and Policy Advocacy with Krystal Folk-Nagua and Erika Chambers. Um, a quick description of myself. I'm a white woman, 60-ish, straight, short blonde hair, blue glasses, blue being the frame, not the color of the glass, and wearing a black sweater. Uh, uh, I'm going to start with a land acknowledgement on behalf of the Planning Committee for the Social Workers Confronting Racial Injustice Conference. I ask that you join me in acknowledging that our University of Wisconsin-Madison campus resides within the sacred homeland of the Ho-Chunk people, a place they called Dejope or Four Lakes. We respectfully recognize the inherent sovereignty of the Ho-Chunk people and the other 11 First Nations of Wisconsin. Whether you are watching this from the land of these 12 First Nations or you are more distant, we encourage you to learn the history of the land and the people that came before on the land and are still here. As social workers, we have a duty to look critically at the role of our profession and the role it played in the attempted cultural genocide and destruction of Indigenous families, as was the case of boarding schools. This conference aims to bring clarity about the past, but also seeks to challenge and inspire us all into action in our work here and now in communities to support Indigenous rights and racial equity. Um, a few quick Zoom reminders for you all. This presentation is being recorded and will be available on our conference website sometime early next week. The slides will be available alongside with it. Uh, the second thing I want you all to know, to access this presentation, you were required to provide your name and email. This is the information which allows us to log attendees and distribute CEUs. Those will be distributed in the coming weeks. Your cameras and microphones will remain muted. Your ability to be in touch and submit is through the Q&A feature. If you have questions for our presenters, please use the Q&A feature. Given the large number of attendees, the chance we will get to all questions might be low, but please do get those questions in. And now, with all that out of the way, it is my pleasure to introduce our presenters for this important panel, Innovating for Equity, Delivering Anti-Racist Service Delivery and Policy Advocacy. Dr. Krystal Folk-Nagua, Dr. Social Work, is a Black feminist and abolitionist social worker, passionate about dismantling the school to prison pipeline and advocating for and advancing the lives of Black and Brown youth and women. She is an adjunct instructor at NYU's Silver School of Social Work and the College of Social Work at Louisiana State University. Dr. Folk-Nagua is currently the Senior Director of Programs at a nonprofit. She has prior experience as the Director of Social Work at a charter middle school, a therapist at an alternative to incarceration program, and a forensic social worker at a public defender's office. Dr. Folk-Nagua sits on the board of the New York State School Social Work Association and received her doctorate in social work from NYU, her MSW from Columbia School of Social Work, and her BSW from University at Albany. Welcome, Dr. Krystal Folk-Nagua. And Erika Chambers, LMSW, works as the Director of Healing and Justice Programs, development, Program Development and Operations. In this role, she supports healing justice integration into youth programming, impact, and evaluation using healing, restorative, and transformative justice praxis to guide her work. Her favorite part of this role is co-creative spaces of joy, healing, and liberation with young people. I'm delighted that we will be getting to hear from the two of you today and welcome you to the conference.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Laura. Excuse me. I'm going to get our slides up now. We're ready to go, right?
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Oh, can I have requests to share my screen, please? Okay, perfect. Want to make, okay, perfect. So I'm going to pass the mic to Erika to get us started.
Thanks, Krystal. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Liberatory Leadership and Praxis in Action, delivering anti-racist service delivery and policy advocacy with myself, Erika, and Krystal. So our agenda for today, just to give you a little overview, we're going to start with an intro, discussing like intro to liberatory praxis, what it is and why it's important. And then we'll move into liberatory leadership, implementing liberatory praxis at the workplace, and then flow into liberatory service delivery and political advocacy. So putting liberatory praxis into programming and advocacy. And then we'll wrap up with a little summary and some time for question Q&A. So again, my name is Erika Chambers. I use she, her pronouns. I'm coming to you from Lenape land. I'm a light-skinned woman of color with brown curly hair up in a ponytail, and I'm wearing a black button-down shirt. And I'll pass it back to Krystal for another quick introduction.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Krystal Folk-Nagua. I am a Black woman with shorter locks than this picture has right now, but I do have locks that are curled right now and a purple sweater on. And we're going to dive into the topic. So we're going to get started talking about liberatory praxis. What is this? I know right now there's a lot of different buzzwords out there. We want to make sure that you have the full information to get into this work. We also want to highlight that this section is really going to ground us on what it is to really engage in this praxis. So before we start off into really discussing how we're going to put some stuff in action, we really need to start with the history of this country. Actually, I should rephrase that, the history of what is known as the United States, as we have mentioned with the land acknowledgement, we are living on stolen land. I forgot to mention I'm also on Lenape land over here in New York City. So that goes right into the beginning of the history of the United States. And so we're talking about the colonization and land theft that happened because of the violent seizures of the indigenous lands and the dismantling of the native culture that is continuing to last today. After that, we unfortunately started to experience the transatlantic slave trade, which is the racialized cattle trade to steal people from their homelands, separate families, and have them do the work to make this land, quote unquote, great. We're going to move a little bit forward to the 13th Amendment. So we're talking about the time where we have quote unquote abolish slavery. And I say that because this amendment specifically says that slavery can exist if someone has committed a crime. So there were the creation of policies that were in place to make sure that targeted people, again, Black and Brown people, were able to get into what is called the criminal industrial complex. So we also have another example of oppression happening here with the Jim Crow laws, which are laws that made like segregation possible and then also created more barriers for Black and Brown people to have equal opportunity. And then the civil rights movement, a great movement, right? We're talking about a form of liberation trying to happen, trying to have freedom. We see similar movements happening across the country right now, and hopefully we're going to see some progress happen from that. And unfortunately, we know that when that happens, there are other things that happen to prevent that liberation. So thinking about the law and order policies or the idea of like the super predator or the 1994 Criminal Bill Act, which again has lots of different barriers, oppressions, and racialized laws to keep Black and Brown people from getting liberation. And lastly, thinking about police brutality and the policing of Black, Indigenous people of color, that is still happening today. We're currently seeing this with ICE. Again, anytime that there are instances of these communities of colors fighting for liberation, there is always a form of oppression attacking it. So why am I talking about this right now? What we have to realize is that the history of the country that is called the United States, it dictates what happens in our policies and our laws and our systems. It bleeds into everything that exists and how we move and how we operate. And so we must be aware of these things in order to be able to make the liberatory changes that we want to make. And again, why this matters is because there's this idea of white supremacy or white dominance that is in play, and again ingrained into everything that says white people are inherently superior than other races and ethnicities. And so if there's something that says that one group of people is superior, that means that there is also oppression, which means that the other group who are sometimes also known as just like the others or the majoritized group are not really treated as fully human and rather, as we are seeing in current times, being treated in dehumanizing ways and are being denied opportunities that the counter group in this situation, we're talking about white dominance, so the white counterparts do have. And I say all this to say that power is always present. There's never going to be a situation where there isn't power. And so when we talk about doing liberatory work, we have to think about how are we going to move in these systems and use the power that we have. And as a person of color, I could say that I do have power because of my positionality, because of like the education I have, and we're going to dive in a little bit later in the case study how Eric and I use these positionalities to address some changes in our own organization. And so in order to address power, and now we know that the root of a lot of this is oppression and specifically racism. We have to think about how we can engage in that. And that means we need to engage in ethical anti-racist practice, which involves acknowledging, naming, and redistributing power to promote equity, trust, and collaboration. Because when there is oppression, there is also harm, and we have to address that harm, heal that harm, and then continue to work with people for that enhancement of liberation. So what we practice is anti-racist social work. And so what this is a model that is rooted in power analysis, equity, and client liberation. I will say that the slides say client, but I also want to make it clear that you could use anti-racist social work practice in all levels of social work. I might also say communities or young people because we do work with young people throughout this presentation as we give examples. I just wanted to name that. And anti-racist social work is also focused on dismantling structural inequalities rather than treating the symptoms. So, as I said, the US is inherently racist and inherently oppressive. So all of the systems in play are oppressive and racist. And instead of looking at the people who are targeted as the symptom, anti-racist practice means that we are looking at the structural issues that are in play and seeing how to address that rather than the person who is impacted. And a lot of this work is grounded in reflexivity, cultural humility, and accountability. And we also center client self-determination, dignity, and resistance. And I want to name that sometimes resistance is seen as a negative thing. However, we use resistance as a term of like empowerment and also as a term of it is a political term, right? So we'll be using it a lot throughout our presentation. And lastly, again, like we said, power is always in play, privilege is always in play, and we have to make sure that we analyze that to see how all of these systems are impacting our clients. So what are some core tenets to use? We want to make sure that we're able to make sure that the power is visible in our practice, and this could be as simple as naming that the power dynamics exists. We want to be able to challenge institutional and systemic harms. Center the marginalized voices, histories, and knowledge, and reframe clients' experiences through strength, resilience, and context. So how are we going to do this? For this presentation, we're focusing specifically on liberation theory. And so this is a theory that aims to transform social, political, and institutional conditions that create oppression by focusing on raising critical consciousness, which is critical reflection, and also fostering social action, social change through action. And so key principles of this theory, very similar to anti-social work practice, we're centering self-determination of the client. We're helping them realize their power and their agency. We're explicitly naming the power dynamics at play. We're supporting the client and their communities to resist, and we're doing that jointly. So there's collective action there. We're integrating political education into clinical work. And again, like I said, this is all levels of social work as well. And then we're also approaching healing as a personal and systemic process. And so in order to have liberation, to really fully achieve it, social workers have to address the structural root of suffering. What I love about social work is our key foundation value is social justice. So if we're not advocating for social justice, we're not really fully utilizing the power of our degrees as social workers. And so we really need to dive into that value in order to work towards achieving liberation. So continuing to talk about some elements of liberation practice. Again, this idea of critical consciousness, which is coined by Paul Freire, is about developing awareness of structural oppression and naming those power dynamics in real time. And again, this is also doing a lot of self-reflection and a lot of reflection about what is happening in, with our clients, what systems are at play. We're also going to make sure that our clients and our communities are engaged. So again, we're really focusing on those who are marginalized and making sure that their voices are heard. We cannot decide what people need. They have to be the ones to tell us what they need. And so we want to make sure that we're supporting in that way by engaging in collective action and validating community-led strategies. Again, we're looking at the structural interventions that need to be targeted to challenge the unjust policies. And we're doing this by advocating both like within our agencies and institutions as well as outside of them. And again, healing as political, we're understanding that trauma is tied to structural violence. And so there has to be healing done because harm was done in the systemic oppression that exists. And we're reframing healing as part of liberation and resistance. So we use the term liberatory praxis in our title. This might be, again, another buzzword, so we're really going to break it down to you. We talked about antisocial social work. We talk about liberation theory. And so we're going to bring that all together to talk about liberatory practice. So again, when we have this idea of liberatory, we're talking about freedom from oppression and the systems that are in play to keep that oppression going. We talk about praxis. Praxis is the idea that we have this theory, we're going to do something about it. So that's the action part. And then we're going to reflect and see where else we could target how, like what's happening internally, what's happening with our clients, and what's happening in the world to continue to do this work. I will name that as we saw with like the history of the US, this work is still happening, right? So this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's a continuous process. And I will also name it might be something that we may not see happen. However, every step of resistance, every time that we're able to challenge the systems, change is happening. And so that's why it's important to continue to do this work. And so liberatory praxis is the cycle of reflection and action aimed at dismantling the oppressions that exist and creating collective liberation. And collective liberation is again talking about this shared struggle through co-conspiratorship. We're working with people, and Erika's going to dive into that in the next section. We're staying grounded in critical consciousness and solidarity. And then we're also being humble. Like this is a humbling, being a social worker is very humbling, right? And so we have to remember the humanity that exists. It's also very challenging. So it takes courage to do the work that we do. And again, like I said, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. So it's going to take a long-term commitment. And a key component that we like to add to that is healing justice, because we are doing this work while we're also healing. So what is healing justice? It's a political framework that addresses and transforms the collective and generational trauma from systemic oppression to build collective power and healing towards liberation. It was coined by Kindred Southern Healing Justice Collective in 2006 and is informed by ancestral traditions of healing and community care. And this is a framework that helps us approach ways that we approach movement work. Again, thinking about some key elements, it centers survivors, healings, and human dignity. It creates capacity for relational accountability. It creates infrastructure to support collective care outside the carceral and surveillance systems. And it empowers practitioners to analyze and challenge their positionality with systems of oppression. I will pass it over to Erika.
Thanks, Krystal. So moving into liberatory leadership, we can go to the next slide. We want to start with this belief that we have, Krystal and I, and other folks too, and we hope you can get on board with this, that leadership is a verb. Anyone can exercise leadership, not only people in positions of power and authority. And so we invite you to think about within your role, what are the decisions that you make daily? What are decisions you make weekly and monthly within your role where you might be able to exercise leadership, and specifically liberatory leadership, which we'll be talking about in our session today. And what are the impacts of your actions? So you're making these decisions. We all make decisions hundreds of times a day. And what are the impacts of those decisions and those actions that we make? And in what ways can you organize to build community, advocate, and affect change with your colleagues, with service recipients, and with stakeholders? Next slide, please. So the core skills within the liberatory leadership model are making ethical decisions under constraint, communicating across disciplines and power differences, analyzing systems and anticipating unintended harm or the impacts of our actions, influencing decisions without positional authority, When we don't have authority, how can we still use the positionality that we have to influence decisions towards liberation? Advocating strategically for equitable outcomes, and building and sustaining interdisciplinary relationships. And so when we're thinking about that as a practice, it's rooted in professional values and social justice. It's understanding that leadership without that piece of justice often reinforces harm. We've talked about power is always present. So if leadership is not also including that element of justice and liberation, it's often reinforcing those cycles of oppression and that exist within our systems. And then justice-centered leadership also means aligning our daily actions with our values. And this is for us, this can also be for, when we're thinking about like mezzo macro level social work, the organizations, the institutions that we're a part of, the policies that, we have in our organizations that are those aligned with our values. And then moving beyond statements to structural change and using influence intentionally. Okay, next slide, please. So when we are, as we talked about earlier, a core concept of liberatory praxis is understanding power and the power structures and dynamics that exist within relationships and within institutions and systems. And so when we're thinking about existing power structures, there are three different types that we can think about. And the first is power over, which is a power structure in which there is a power imbalance, and that imbalance is utilized. So we can think about an example of that could even be like a mandated behavior plan for a client. That is, there's a power imbalance and it's being utilized in that situation. Power with is a power structure in which there is shared power. And that might look like a co-created behavior plan, for instance. And then the power with model is a power structure in which there is full self-agency. And so that might look like a client creating their own behavior plan. And then another part that we need to be looking at for power is mapping out power dynamics. What are the dynamics that exist? And that can look like power that exists within hierarchical structures, within an organization or institution, even within an interpersonal relationship, leadership versus authority, decision-making structures, cultures of feedback. So how is feedback received? When and who gets to give feedback? And is it seen as a positive or a negative thing to give feedback and receive feedback? And then the same with cultures of consent. So who gets to consent and when? How is that consent received or not received, et cetera. Another important thing to consider is how identities and intersecting identities that a person holds influence or impact power and privilege within our relationships and within systems. So here's a list of identities that could impact power dynamics. It's not the full list, but race and gender, we know we've talked about. Krystal shared, some of the history of the United States. We know that there is systemic oppression, racism, sexism that exists within the world. And then in addition to that, some of the other ones that we might want to be thinking about within power that can influence power dynamics and power structures could be like mandated status. How might being mandated to services or a person's immigration status, for instance, create power dynamics that impact their self-agency and their ability to fully consent? Same with age. For example, young people tend to experience very little systemic power. If you think about a school environment, for example, where adults are in positions of power and authority, and young people are told when they'll work, when they'll eat, if they have permission to use the restroom or go to the nurse. So, how might these constant socializations of a power over model impact how young people understand their own ability to consent and their own ability to exercise their power? And then another one, oh, I'm sorry, go back for a second, please. Another one we might want to consider in our, for the sake of our conversation right now for today is professional position and seniority. And we can think about, for instance, like a supervisor-supervisee relationship, or even the dynamics that might exist between a senior level social worker and a social work intern, for example. How are those power dynamics showing up in the way that we're relating to one another and the way that we're working towards liberation frameworks or liberatory frameworks? Those are just some examples. There's also an additional layer to consider when you factor in intersectionality, which considers how a person's multiple identities may uniquely impact or compound their experience for power and privilege. And so, even if you're not actively or intentionally engaging in the power over structure, how might the existing power dynamics and intersecting identities impact a client's empowerment to consent and to engage in their own self-advocacy and self-agency? And so, as Krystal named earlier, even just acknowledging that power dynamic and actively creating space for choice and consent are essential in liberatory leadership. Next slide, please. Okay. So, when exercising liberatory leadership, it's also important to consider what structures and systems you're working within. And we call this the organizational policy and infrastructure audits. Some questions to consider are which policies and protocols align with the mission, vision, and values of your organization or your practice, and which might need some stronger alignment. Similarly, what structures exist that support the mission, the vision, and values of your organization or practice? Who has decision-making rights from infrastructure and policy all the way to daily implementation of those policies? And then as you're thinking about the structures that exist in your role, it's also important to think about this key question that's in the dark green on the slide, which is it rooted in safety or is it rooted in control? Are my actions and are our policies rooted in safety or control? Are the policies that we have rooted in controlling behavior and outcomes, or are they rooted in the safety and self-dignity of the client? How can we move toward closer alignment towards safety and also honoring self-agency of our clients, and also moving towards that for ourselves and our colleagues as well when we're thinking about institutional shifts? So that's a question that I'll leave you with to ponder on. And I'm going to pass it back over to Krystal for the next section.
Yes, thank you, Erika. So now that we've dive in a little deeper into liberatory praxis and liberatory leadership, we're going to tell you how to put this into action, right? Like, this is great, but how do we do it? And so we're going to give you a few examples that are actually happening in our organization and talk you through how you could have them happen in your organization as well. So this model, this chart shows a few models that we're currently using to help us redistribute power. And by doing that, we are shifting who makes decisions, who has the key knowledge, and who's able to control resources. So the first one we're talking about is participatory budgeting. This is where community members directly decide how funds are allocated. And this moves um, the financial decision making away from executives, boards, and funders and puts it into the hands of the people who are most impacted. So for us, we work with young people, so a lot of our examples are going to be very youth focused, and we're going to dive into that a little bit later. However, I do want to note that like this can happen with adults, like everybody. Um, and this is connected to liberatory praxis because budgets are political documents that reflect values, right? Where is the money going shows what is valued most in an organization. The next example that we have is participatory action research, or PAR or PAR. And this is where community members act as researchers. So they're not the subjects. They get to decide what they want to research. They have full control over that. They collect the data, they analyze the findings, and they use those findings to help shape policy recommendations. And so this allows a shift of power and a shift of knowledge production from institutions back to the communities who are most impacted. The next one that we're really big fans of in our organization is the Healing Justice Infrastructure. And this is community-led systems of care that operate outside of the carceral punishment structures. And so the goal of this is redefining what safety is, what healing is, and what accountability is, depending on community terms. And so this is a great example that we're going to show later, how we do this with both staff and the young people that we work with. And so this is reducing reliance on any outside structures and really making sure that we're operating from a sense of care. And then the last model we're going to specifically talk about today is co-creation. So this is where community members are embedded into the creation of services by being co-designers, co-facilitators, and also like decision makers. So it makes us staff no longer be the quote unquote experts, but rather we're collaborators and we're co-conspirators with the people that we are working with. And so this creates both a process change and a power change. So overall, we really just wanted to show that it might seem very challenging to do this within organizations, but these are some examples and some models that you're going to do, and we're going to dive into how we are currently doing this in our organization. So I'm gonna first talk about more of the staff focus and how we've been doing some of those things. So for organizational policy and infrastructure changes, our team actually has done some power mapping and power distribution analysis within our organization, and this is an ongoing process. So the team meets with each department. They have these check-in meetings to see like how things are going, and we work to see where some shifts can be made. We do understand that we work within a system. We're a nonprofit. Right, we get it. Like we are within the system. However, we're trying to see what changes can be made here. And so this requires regular analysis of the internal power dynamics at play and how staff show up in spaces. And some of the things is that we've noticed so far is that staff seem to be more comfortable to show up as themselves, knowing that these types of analysis are happening and that people aren't afraid of the power dynamics at play. And again, this is really done by co-facilitating meetings, making sure that staff are able to provide input, and then engaging in collective decision making. And then, so what we're really proud of is we have a whole healing justice team. And so this team, which is led by Erika and her co-director, they really take time to think of holistic wellness. How can we, within the organization, engage in holistic wellness while also acknowledging that we have some challenging work to do? So something that's very important is emphasizing that we are human. There's a lot going on in this world, especially right now. So making sure that there's time to check in and allow for us to be human. So an example of this is in meeting spaces, we have a check-in question, which could be something silly, or it could be like, tell us something like, happy that happened this weekend, or what's the last thing that made you smile, or if you were going to get a tattoo, what would it be, right? And this is all staff. And that was actually an example of our question this Monday. So every single person from the executive director um, is there and answering these questions and just having time to like be human before we dive into the meeting and get to the work of it. Um, it's just really important again to like build that trust, build that sense of community to allow for us to be able to continue to do this work. We also normalize capacity checks. And what we mean by that is just saying, how are you doing? We understand that the work that we do is challenging. We have a lot of tasks, and a lot of needs need to be met. However, they cannot be met if you don't have the capacity to do it. So we specifically on our team, we make sure that we kind of do some collective work sometimes. So if someone's like, hey, I need to get this done, but I need support, we encourage that. And so other members on the team will step up and be like, I could support you with this part, or I could support you with that part, right? And just really come together and make sure that people are able to continue to move through the work in a way that allows them to have capacity to really give their fullest. We also examine urgency culture. So, like I've been saying, we understand that work needs to be done. We're not saying that it doesn't. We're also saying that let's evaluate like the sense of urgency that we put on certain things. Like, is it a sense of urgency to, for example, make sure this document is reviewed when it's not due for like 3 weeks? No, right? Like, we're going to try and prioritize what needs to be done. And we are encouraged to set our boundaries and some things like that, right? Because specifically for our team, we work with young people. They're in programs 4 days a week. We use them as our priority, right? Like, is this going to help us on these 4 days censor our young people? If the answer is no, we're going to adjust. It doesn't mean that the work is not going to get done, but we always prioritize our youth, and our team and our organization knows that. And so that also allows us to really build infrastructures that prevent burnout. And a way to do that, our organization, I believe, is really cool because we have like Wellness Wednesday where we actually get to log off early, or like we have no meeting Fridays where we work remotely for the most part. We do have hybrid, like I said, we have programming. However, a lot of the work that we do is remote, so no meeting Fridays. Our leadership team has graciously given us this day to not have any meetings and really focus on getting work done because we know that like Zoom fatigue is real, right? And so it gives us a break, allows us to heal, and also allows us to do the work. And all of this really connects to wellness and like sustainability and resistance, right? Rest is resistance. That's not a buzzword. It's like really true. Like being able to rest and not operate in a sense of urgency is resisting the power dynamics and the white supremacy ideals that are in place. Um, yes, I'm gonna pass it back to Erika.
Thanks, Krystal. So now we're going to go into a little bit more of an example for how we work with our young people. And so, as we said, when we're thinking about collective liberation, staff work collaboratively with young people while centering and protecting their input and their wellness. We have multiple avenues for youth co-creation, collaboration, and leadership in our work. We really try to center power with and power within models. And again, as Krystal said, we're constantly analyzing the structures and like policies that we have to ensure that like where the areas are in which we can move towards power with and power within and away from power over. And so what you're looking at here on this screen is kind of like a flow chart of how the cycles of youth, like guidance, input, and their feedback flow into the work that we do. And so We are youth-centered, and that means that the youth guide the work and they're seen as the experts. And then staff follow that youth guidance to shape our work plans and objectives for every single year. We engage in artivism as policy engagement. And that looks like intergenerational moments with staff and youth using art and activism to advance our policy demands. For example, designing denim jackets to include survivorship-centered policy demands for Denim Day. And then zooming out a little bit, youth have multiple opportunities to create those policy demands. And then staff work with them to advocate for the demands that youth have created, which then impacts both program and policy spaces internally and externally, such as taking young people to Albany to share their policy demands with legislators. And so youth provide feedback on every factor of the program implementation process, including events and advocacy work. They create and host town halls. They engage in feedback surveys and feedback activities specifically for programming. We have focus groups with our young people at the end of each programmatic year, again, to get more formalized feedback. And then we also are engaging in youth participatory action. So, going back to what Krystal said earlier about participatory action research, and also participatory budgeting, building. And what we want to do within that is also build up the skills and infrastructure for youth to be able to engage in that. So it's not just giving them the full, authority over the budget, but creating opportunities for financial literacy trainings and group skill building, and working with them to give them the decision-making power that they can have. Again, we work in a nonprofit. So there's, we still work within the constraints of like what that means. But for instance, if there is an event that they want to hold, what kinds of activities do they want to do? We can give them a certain budget for getting the food for that event and getting the materials, the materials for the activities that we're going to do. And so they're really getting to see how an event is created, how to implement it, what the budget looks like for something like that. And they are really getting to have like a lot of leadership and a lot of co-creation in those spaces. And then again, like with all of that feedback that we're getting, our program events and program sessions are designed using that feedback, and youth then can also become co-facilitators of those spaces and co-organizers and lead that implementation through youth fellowships and as alumni. Next slide, please. So we invite you to think about your own liberatory leadership action plan, and what are some areas of your work or your role where you could exercise liberatory leadership. So what would you be seeking to change, or what are you seeking to change? And when we're thinking back about redistributing power and creating infrastructure shift, some questions to consider would be, whose voices are currently being prioritized in decision making, and whose voices should be prioritized in decision making? What outcomes are being prioritized? How is success defined and measured? And who is this working for? And who's missing from this decision or these decisions? What is some harm that this might cause, or like what are the impacts or potential impacts of these decisions? What are some small changes that would, I'm sorry, what are some small changes that would result in more power sharing? And what are some larger changes that would result in more power sharing? And that's easier said than done, right? So this work is not easy, and we know it's not easy. Um, and so some of the challenges that you might confront while engaging in liberatory leadership would be structural, right? Change takes time, and changes don't happen overnight for structural change and sustainability. We need to create buy-in, right? And foundational knowledge to be able to affect change. And so working with other colleagues and teams like HR, if it's policy-wise, to find places of existing alignment and where there might be need for further alignment. And again, who has decision-making rights in these processes? And for the people who have decision-making rights, who are those who you already have in your corner, right? Your supports. Who could you go to and they're going to already support your decision? They're aligned with you, they're on board. And who of those stakeholders who have decision-making rights need a little bit more information or alignment in order to get on board with these changes? Because it comes down to a willingness of decision makers to enact change and support liberatory praxis within institutions and organizations and structures, right? And then, of course, we always have to consider the legal and structural constraints that apply to the work that we do. But it's all about identifying the changes that you can affect. Again, those small changes, those big changes, even on a small or a micro level, that change can create a snowball effect for larger change down the line. So no small change is too small of a change. And with that, we are complete. We thank you so much for joining us today, and we do have some time for Q&A if folks have any questions.
We've had a lot of questions about getting the PowerPoint. Those will be up with the recording when the recording goes up next week. The slides will be up there as well. I think we will try and get those slides up today onto the conference website. So I'll do my best on that. So that's great. We're getting a lot of appreciation in the chat. There's a question from an anonymous attendee. Does your organization have a website? Would love to check it out.
We do have a website, but we're not representing them today. We're just using them as a case example. So I'll say look me up on LinkedIn. You could see where I work.
And please feel free to ask concrete special or the examples. Erika and Krystal, you were both talking about no small change is too small. Do you have some, like, here's an idea for a small change, and just some experiences or seeing how it changes how youth approach the programming once you do make those changes? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can give two examples. One that we received a lot of positive feedback on was when we shifted to young people deciding the food for each week for programming. Before, we were it was like, okay, we'll just get pizza, or like, we know what you like. We would ask them at the beginning of program, like, what do you like? And then we would just decide. But once we shifted to the week before, or like the session before, asking young people what they want to eat, that had really, really positive feedback. So they're getting to decide what they want to eat. And that was something that folks said that they felt empowered in that. And it also actually provided us like interestingly enough, like a sense of food security to them in being able to like choose that and like know that they were going to have some food that they were like really excited about eating. Um, and then another example is that I was running program a few years ago, and the young people were coming into the program sessions with like a lot needing a lot of time to decompress from like being out in the world and coming from school and all of the like external things that were going on in their lives. And it was they were having a hard time being able to like jump into the content as quickly as like I had written in my lesson plans. um, and so I talked with them about what they would need to be able to feel like they could be fully present in the session. And they asked for more time at the beginning to do the check-in question and to like get to just like be and um, and to socialize in the way that they wanted to before we got into the content. And so we compromised, and I gave them an additional like 15 minutes each week for the rest of the program year. And they got to choose what the check-in question was, or like what our opening activity was every single week. And sometimes that was like, I just wanted us to like sit here and like listen to music for 15 additional minutes and just like decompress, and then I'll be ready. And that's okay. It's their time. So they get to do that. And then we would get on to the rest of the session. And like that was a way of us being able to compromise, because obviously I have to get through my content. Um, and also they needed a little bit more time to decompress, and that's okay too.
Thanks for that, Erica. Noticing some more questions in the Q&A. Anonymous asked, what are some self-care things that you do personally to sustain yourself during liberatory praxis? And it was not shared already. So I could start, and then Erica, if you want to, jump in, please feel free to do so. A lot of what we do is keep ourselves accountable and keep each other accountable. So you have to treat self-care like it's a task on your to-do list for your job. Um, Even if it's like, hey, for example, like I'm not feeling well or I have a headache, and just being like communicative about that, and then just taking some time away, right? Like I said, we're on our computers a lot, and so that's something that I'm firm in. Something that you could do, let's just say like you're not remote or anything like that, take lunch. I remember being in schools and I never took lunch. I was like, I have no time. I have to keep doing. Nope, you have an hour of lunch. It is law. This is one of those laws that we like, right? So make sure that you like take your lunch, even if you're not eating, if it's just like going outside. Well, not right now if you're in the cold, but even if it's like going outside for a walk or hiding away someplace where other people can't find you, or meditating, listening to music, whatever it is that you love to do for you, take that time and treat it like a meeting that cannot be canceled, because I think that's always what happens. Our self-care is the first thing that goes. So definitely make sure you keep it like a task that has to be done. And then also be kind to yourself. If, maybe to like one day is very challenging. It's really hard to do like the full hour, but please like try your hardest to commit to some time away for yourself, because all this work is challenging. Um, yeah, I think that's my advice. Do you want to add, Erica?
I'd love to add, I started looking at all the questions, and I'm sorry, I can't remember what the, the question we're answering is.
Yes, of course. It was, oh, yeah, we had more. It kind of jumped away from me. But
Self-care.
yeah, how do you engage in self-care while doing liberatory practice? It was something like that.
Oh, whew, yeah. Lunch is a big one. Um, we have we use Google Calendar at our organization, so some folks block off their lunch hour every single day, so that there's no way that another meeting can be placed on the calendar, and like folks know that that's like their designated time. Um, I think that I'm going to answer this question also with somebody else's question in the chat, which is what is an example of a capacity check? Um, and so, as Krystal shared, we do start all of our, like, most of our meetings, unless we are in several meetings together. But we'll start our meetings with a check-in question. And sometimes that question is like, how are you showing up in the space today? Um, what's on your mind? What's in your heart? On a scale of 1 to 10, how are you feeling? And so that gives folks an opportunity to, again, like, there's an additional level of trust and relationship building that has been cultivated in our teams. So folks feel safe enough to share, maybe not all of what they're going through, but certainly, like, I'm having a hard day today, or like I'm moving a little slow today, and I'm not entirely sure like how much I'm going to be able to like get to of this specific task within the deadline, or I need a little bit more support. And so being able to advocate for yourself, in that way, and being able to like still show up for the work, but asking for some support is another way that you can engage in self-care. Um, I think also like outside of the work, within, like your 9 to 5, being able to like engage in some practices that feel good to you, whether that's like decompressing on the train, without your phone, maybe just some music, or doing a meditation, going for a walk when it's not freezing out, unless you love to be in the cold. Um, those are some things that are like small practices that you can also do, that can help you to reset. Community care and like community support is also something I think that's really important. So finding some people who, you know, help you to feel refreshed and pour into your cup, I think is really important, as a part of self-care.
There's so many questions. I don't know how to decide which one. Laura, did you see one that really stuck out? And then I'll pick the next one.
All right. Well, there was a question, and I think that there's a lot of interest in resources and
Mhm.
books or writers or other things. I think hearing you all talk a little bit about that would be great for a lot of folks.
Sure. Of course, now that you asked this, they all fled my brain because that's what happens. But what I can commit to doing is create like a few resource lists and like share it with you, Laura, if that's okay. And you can like upload it with like the video and the presentation. Um, but the first one that comes to mind is Paul Ferry. A lot of what he does resonates with me very well. And so I would say that's a great place to start if you're just like starting to learn about abolitionist social work or liberatory social work, whichever term you want to use. They're kind of the same. Erica, do you have anyone you want to add?
Yeah, I think, from some of the things that we were talking about today, also, Healing Justice Lineages
Mm.
by, Kara Page and Erica Woodland. Um, Also, we talked about a little bit about Rest as Resistance. That's a book by Trisha Hersey. And then I think when we're thinking about structural change, in like the liberatory framework, I really like, Emergent Strategy. Oh, that's a good one too. Emergent Strategy, by Adrienne Marie Brown. And I'll pass it back over to Krystal, who's got some books in her hand.
Yes, I was like, oh, my bookshelf is right here. What do I see? Angela Davis, of course. Freedom is a constant struggle. So that's definitely one that you could look up. I think we have some like school social workers here, or people who work in school settings. Um, oh my goodness. Dr. Love, what is her first name? Just left my mind. I think I have one of her books over there. I would recommend her. I centered a lot, even though hers is focused for teachers, I centered a lot of my social work practice when I was in school around her work. Benita Love, Dr. Benita Love. So all her books, I'm gonna look back at my bookshelf. Give me a second. I can't find it. It like rotates, but I think it's like we're trying to do more than survive. I can't remember the exact title. But like I said, I have no problem like going through and like creating a list to share out. Okay, I promised I would do the next question. Where did the questions go? Any suggestions for how these concepts can be applied to promote larger community change? For example, do you mean like within the community, like the world we're living in right now, for example, or kind of like within the organization?
I think it's a great idea to take on this world that we're living right now and just think about how liberatory practice
Yeah.
lands.
Yeah. I mean, we're seeing it, right? The movements that are happening. Minneapolis, everyone is like coming out in this frigid weather, demanding justice. Everybody's coming together. You see co-conspiratorship. So those who are most impacted are collaborating with those who have more influential power because of the power dynamics out there. And they're saying this is not okay. We're not okay with this. We need to be able to live in a world where this type of oppression and violence doesn't happen. I think that's like a great example. Um, Also, knowledge is power. I know that's kind of like a cliche phrase, but it really is. So like distributing, just like y'all ask for resources, getting some information out there. I think within the school systems, a lot of parents don't know their rights, right? And so thinking about our parent communities, making sure that they know the Bill of Rights, making sure that they know like ACS services aren't actually required. It's just because of the power that ACS has, it makes them feel like it is, or sorry, CPS. ACS is for New York City, but like Child Protective Services, it's not actually required, at least in New York City or New York State. But because of the power that ACS has, people think that they have to accept it. They technically do not. And so, like, little things like that, again, like just getting that knowledge out there can make a whole lot of a difference because parents talk, right? It's like, did you know that you didn't actually have to do this? And it spreads. Um, and I think that's just like very important, like getting information out there. If you have the means to get resources out in communities, that's another great way to go. And also just offering like community care. Just like a little check-in goes a long way. I'll pass it to Erica if there's anything else you want to add.
I think you
No?
answered that perfectly.
Thanks. You want to do the next question?
Sure. I think I saw a couple that maybe can be put into one question about getting people on board who are not quite aligned or not motivated to enact the change. Um, and I think a lot of it comes down to, again, like change can be very slow in getting that buy-in. I think that it's one thing that can be helpful are discussions, formal discussions, and even like presentations if you have time for it, that can help to start to build that foundational understanding of liberatory praxis and an anti-racist social work. And that like building that foundational knowledge of it is really helpful again for like starting to help people to align. Sometimes it's also about finding the motivation that will support them in like helping you to make that change. And it's not always going to come from like, this is the right thing to do. And like, we are social workers with social justice values. Sometimes maybe it's for them about money and like you could be saving money or it's like a better investment. And like that's hard for me to say sometimes because like that's not what I believe. And I don't think a lot of social workers, we believe that. But sometimes finding the framing that is still true to the situation, but from the perspective of the other stakeholders is something that can be really helpful for trying to shift that change um, and being able to show like the outcomes and the benefits of that change. Krystal?
Yeah, I would also add a lot of it is about building like relational trust. So like again, like knowing who the stakeholders are, and if we're talking about like maybe a leadership team that's not really open. I saw I was scrolling through the questions, something mentioned about like when race comes up, people kind of want to avert it. Um, we can't do that, right? So I'm not trying to it's hard to have conversations with somebody if you don't have a relationship with them, like these challenging conversations, right? And so I'm not saying you have to be their best friend. I'm not saying you have to have the same values. You have to be able to have a conversation with somebody and be able to know that, like, in this conversation, like both voices will be heard. And so it's about like really using those social work skills of like meeting people where they at, leading from curiosity, asking questions. And it is really challenging. Race is a hot topic, right? To not go from a place of defense, right? Like sometimes, to be honest, when you have these conversations, you have to talk with some individuals as they are your clients, right? You wouldn't address your client in a defensive manner, so you can't really like address a person in leadership that way if you're trying to build this relational trust. And like once you have that kind of relational trust, then you're able to like dive a little deeper and um go for the more challenging conversations, right? So again, it takes time. It's not something that does happen overnight. Another thing, and Erica kind of mentioned this, but kind of learn the language of the person that you're talking to. Like, how does this person make decisions? And then bring them that information that will help inform that decision. So, for example, I know in like I used to work in charter schools are all about data. So anytime I wanted to try and address something that was happening, I came with my facts, right? This is the examples. This is what I tried. This is showing you that it works. Let's talk about how we could like shift this policy. And so that's kind of like a part of the process of like building that trust also is like learning this person, learning how they operate and really meeting their needs. And like that's really how you're able to make change. And also, I will say you kind of sometimes have to let go of ego, right? There's some people who want it to be their idea. That's fine. It's your idea. Go for it. You decided that we needed to change this policy as long as the policy changed, right? And so being aware of that too. Yeah. How are we doing with time?
I know we're running down on time here. We just have a couple minutes left. And I know we have people our presenters need to leave right at 11:15. So I need to just close us out here by first and foremost thanking Krystal and Erika for this fantastic presentation, both theoretical and practical about how to get going on moving from power over to power with and creating space to be human and some joy, healing, and liberation. Thank you, everyone who came to this conversation and engaged with it. I think, hopefully, the conference committee hopes that this helps you move more practically towards liberation and justice for all the people, especially for racial justice. Please watch an email link to complete an evaluation on today's presentation. And you will get a separate email regarding CEUs for those who have requested them. Those are coming, don't worry. Also, there's another set of great presentations in 45 minutes. So please go to the conference website and you'll find the links for the next 5 presentations. Also, Prentice Hemphill, the author of What It Takes to Heal, will be talking about Transforming the World and Transforming Ourselves at 2 o'clock Central Time. That's a plenary that will be streamed over YouTube. The link is on the website as well. But most of all, just enormous thanks to Krystal and Erika for this model, so relevant and important, and so many ways to get there. Thank you both.
Thank you, everybody. We appreciate it.
Thank you so much.